All right, I'd like to welcome our third panel today, Representative Troy Nels and Representative Jake Auchincloss from the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Representative Nels, when you're ready, we can take your testimony.
I am. All right, thank you, Chairman Cole, Ranking Member McGovern, members of this committee. Senate Joint Resolution 38 was introduced by Senator Rubio in Florida under the Congressional Review Act and reinforces the importance of American manufacturing. This joint resolution of disapproval would invalidate the Federal Highway Administration's final rule, which provides a waiver of Buy America requirements for EV or EV chargers. In November of 2021, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IJA, created the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Formula Program and the Charging Infrastructure Discretionary Grant Program, which were funded at $5 billion and $2.5 billion, respectively. Even prior to IJA's passage, President Biden set a lofty goal of installing 500,000 EV chargers by 2030, 500,000 of these things by 2030, and to support this heedless push for a massive transition to EVs, the Biden administration quickly moved for a Federal Highway Administration Buy American waiver for EV charging infrastructure. Yet the administration's broader implementation of the Buy America provisions included in IJA, they were slow, confusing, contradictory, as stakeholders continued to raise concerns regarding the lack of clarity and certainty. The administration has made it clear that it is willing to waive Buy America requirements when convenient to push its progressive policy agenda, even if it's not in the best for what Americans or our national and energy security. According to the White House, as of early 2023, there are approximately 130,000 public chargers in the United States. Meanwhile, China is leading the world in the build-out of these EV charger network, reportedly constructing 650,000 EV chargers in 2022 alone. However, an estimated 15 companies have opened or committed to opening or expanding EV charger manufacturing facilities right here in the United States. A Buy America waiver for EV chargers undermines these important investments and risks empowering foreign adversaries like China. I have significant concerns with this broader push to EVs. That said, if the Biden administration is going to push their EV agenda on the American people, we cannot allow $7.5 billion with a B of our taxpayer funds to support Chinese companies. Congress should be focused on policies that put America first. For me, that means manufacturing items here and ensuring our labor, security, and safety standards are met. I cannot support merely waiving Buy America requirements simply because it's convenient for one woke agenda while turning a blind eye to the far-reaching ramifications it will have. I urge the Rules Committee to grant the closed rule. That I yield back.
Thanks, Mr. Auchincloss.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member, members of the committee, good evening. I oppose this resolution. The Biden administration has made deployment of electrical vehicle chargers a key provision of its climate agenda, and this resolution would create market uncertainty for the private sector at a time when they are actively investing in American manufacturing jobs. Strengthening the U.S. industrial base is critical, but this resolution would do nothing to achieve this and would actually undermine the work of the Biden administration to invest in American manufacturing and jobs. To achieve our climate goals, deploying EV chargers at scale is important to achieve the network effects necessary to make EVs a more attractive and practical option for consumers. This resolution will put the industry back at square one and delay our clean energy transition and allow competitors like the Chinese Communist Party to fill markets and constrain our ability to compete globally. The bipartisan infrastructure law included new domestic content requirements for all federal infrastructure spending, and the federal highway and transit programs have had Buy America standards for decades. These standards have ensured that any investment in U.S. infrastructure is also an investment in U.S. workers. So to understand the resolution we are debating today, we need to start with a quick history lesson. Since 1983, all manufactured products have been exempt from Buy America under the highway programs. That was a Reagan-era policy. Under this policy, EV chargers funded by the Federal Highway Administration would not have been required to be built in the United States. Further, there would have been no requirements for those chargers to include any domestic content beyond the iron and steel components. So if this policy then had been applied to the $7.5 billion laid out for the EV charging under the BIL, this funding would not have been invested in U.S. workers in the U.S. industrial base. The Biden administration took action to make sure that would not happen. In effect, they did a waiver on a waiver. First, it deemed that the general manufactured products waiver would no longer apply to EV chargers. It then created a new, stronger standard to replace it, a new stronger standard to replace it. Under the new policy, and for the first time, all federally funded EV chargers must be manufactured in the United States. This new policy also includes domestic content requirements for all components, not just those made of iron and steel, as was previously the case. The domestic content requirements ramp up over several years to allow manufacturers the necessary time to expand their capacity in the United States. And it's working. This policy is working. Since 2021, private companies have announced $500 million in investments across the country in EV charging manufacturing facilities. And that's how Buy America is supposed to work, with the government as a customer. You can't flip a switch overnight on a 40-year-old policy. You need to give the private sector time to adjust. That's what the president is doing, and the resolution before us today would send the wrong signal to the private sector and would jeopardize the investments made in the EV charging industry. Beginning on July 1st of this year, all federally funded electric vehicle chargers will be assembled in the United States and will have at least 55% U.S. content, consistent with the Build America, Buy America policy included in the bipartisan infrastructure law. So just to be incredibly clear, what the Biden administration is doing is strengthening Buy America. It's a waiver on a waiver. This approach is a win for U.S. workers, the private sector, and all Americans who will benefit from a more sustainable transportation system. And it's technically called a waiver, but it's actually far more narrowly tailored and a much stronger Buy America policy than the broad waiver it replaces. I wish we had a different term than a waiver. We should call it like a counter waiver or something, because it's not actually what's happening right now. The resolution before us today would erase that progress. If we repeal the new Biden administration approach, electric vehicle chargers would once again fall under the broad general manufactured products exemption. We would create uncertainty for the private sector, who have based their investments and job creation on the new Buy America standards. We would jeopardize the investments already made in this industry, which again relies on critical mass and network effects, and which supports the U.S. industrial base and American jobs. We would undermine our climate goals by delaying the deployment of EV chargers and slowing consumer adoptions of EVs. Some may argue that the Biden administration could just repeal the 40-year-old general manufactured products waiver, the Reagan-era exemption for all manufactured goods. And the administration is in the process of reconsidering that waiver as required under the bipartisan infrastructure law. But it's a complex process to reconsider 40-year-old policy that applies to hundreds of products, ranging from traffic signals to the orange safety barrels we see at work sites. That process is going to take time to get right and should not be used as a rationale for weakening Buy America standards right now that exist today and that are working today. This resolution, again, would weaken Buy America, maybe for a period of months, maybe for a period of years, in the middle of a 5-year span during which we are making record investments in electric vehicle chargers. It would lead to incoherent industrial policy and slow down critical investments. And it's not just my opinion. This resolution is opposed by the women and men of the U.S. Steelworkers, the AFL-CIO, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, those whose jobs will actually be affected by this policy. It's also opposed by the Zero Emission Transportation Association, the National Electrical Manufacturers Association, and Electrify America, whose members include EV charger and component manufacturers. We know, in conclusion, that infrastructure investments have the potential to invest in U.S. workers and American manufacturing, and the Biden administration's approach to EV charger investments delivers on that promise by strengthening the Buy America provisions relative to their 40-year-old standard under Reagan. Given that, I urge my colleagues to reject this resolution.
Thank the witnesses for their testimony. I apologize that I missed most of it. I was at another meeting, and for that reason, I'll forego my questions and turn to my good friend from Pennsylvania for any questions he might have for the panel.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was here. The testimony was absolutely riveting. But for the sake of time, I'm going to go ahead and yield back.
Thank you very much. Recognize my very good friend from Massachusetts for any questions he may have.
Well, I thank both the witnesses for being here. Mr. Archiclaus, I think you made a very compelling argument as to why this is not something we should support. But the good news is it's going nowhere. The good news is that the administration has already issued a veto threat, and that this really is just filler to try to cover up for the fact that we are yet again on the precipice of potentially shutting down the government. Which is really inexcusable. I mean, that's one of the primary jobs that we have is to keep the lights on here, and you never know it from listening to my Republican friends, and especially this leadership fight with each other. But in any event, we're going to move forward. We'll have this debate, and again, it will go nowhere, and my hope is that my friends on the other side are working to try to make sure that we don't shut the government down and basically hurt our economy. although I heard Trump on the news basically saying hopes that there's a meltdown because it helps him in the next election. That tells you where his allegiance and loyalty lie. With that, I yield back.
Gentlelady from Minnesota is recognized for any questions she may have.
And, Mr. Chair, I will just say thank you for being here, and I support the legislation, I support the resolution, and with that, I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized for any questions she may have.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you very much for the presentation, and thank you very much for the history about why we are here in this moment, and the fact that what we are looking at, what the Biden administration has been doing, is actually fixing some of the broad waivers that the Reagan administration gave, so that we weren't manufacturing what we need in America. And I would point out that the total value of U.S. manufacturing output in general, not just in this area, but in general, has increased by $1.3 trillion between the first quarter of 2021 and the third quarter of 2023. We are seeing that the last Congress, our policies and the Biden administration policies have really increased manufacturing in the United States. And it is this kind of policies where you're taking targeted action to start increasing rather than like wiping everything away, which is what this legislation would do. This is how you get it done. And so thank you very much for that history, and thank you very much for your passionate. I loved it when you got excited about how much EV transmission generation we were doing here in the United States. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlelady. Gentleman from South Carolina is recognized for any questions he may have.
No, I just, Troy, thank you for coming here. Two things. One, it doesn't surprise me the Biden administration is waiving the Buy America products. He's tied to China. Look at where his payments came from. Secondly, talk to any car dealer, Williams, that people are not going to buy electric vehicles. They're not going to let the government force them to do it. And this is a complete boondoggle. And
You know what I find interesting? You know, with this waiver notice, the Biden administration argues the waiver is necessary to achieve its, quote, bold vision to reshape the United States transportation system and support a sustainable energy and climate future. But yet, we all know, China is the world's #1 emitter of carbon dioxide in the world, producing 12.7 billion metric tons annually, over double the United States. Given that, I'm confused how allowing us to buy from China, who had their highest temperature of record this past summer, highest, and its hottest year on record, how that will help address global climate concerns and move the needle emissions. This is absolutely ridiculous. These EVs are being thrown down our throat. The American people are rejecting them, and it's not good for this country. Buy America, BABA. Buy America, build American.
I'll give you two examples. Two cars blew up. The batteries completely blew up in South Carolina, hurting 2 children. It's insanity. That's what they're doing. Did you have a comment, Congressman?
Yes, thank you. First of all, I will say on a positive note, it's quite refreshing to hear my Republican colleagues care about the climate and temperature in China. It's a progress for us that we are taking seriously the threat of climate change and what it's going to do for the planet that we're leaving our children. But I do need to reject the premise here that this is a waiver that loosens standards for Buy America. I tried to really delineate quite clearly in my remarks why that's in fact the opposite of the case. There is an existing waiver right now passed under Reagan that broadly for all manufactured goods provides an exemption, including the electric vehicle chargers. This is a waiver on that waiver. So it's really a counter waiver, and it actually tightens the standards. It requires that they be assembled in the United States, which was not previously the case, and in addition to iron and steel, which have always been Buy America protected, it requires that at least 55% of the components of the electric vehicle chargers themselves are now domestic content over the course of the next several years. This is strengthening Buy America. And in fact, this resolution that's being proposed right now, this would help the Chinese Communist Party, because by loosening it, it would allow their state-subsidized manufacturers to flood the U.S. market. So I would encourage those who are concerned either about the climate or about China, or ideally both, to reject this, because this is both a climate-conscious, pro-clean energy opposition here, but also one that supports American manufacturing and jobs.
May I ask a question regarding the, okay, so I don't know what China was like with the United States in 1983, but I think they're a little bit bigger of a threat they are today, 40 years later than 1983. But why didn't the administration just go and address this 1983 rule, this law here? Just address it, address that instead of carving out the EV from this.
But, so, as I said in my remarks, the administration is, as required by the bipartisan infrastructure law, actually reviewing that Reagan-era waiver. That is a waiver that covers everything from traffic cones to electric vehicle chargers. They're doing it methodically, they're doing it surgically, and they're going to do it with Congress's consultation as they should. But that assertion actually suggests that your advocacy for this resolution is misplaced. If you think the administration should be getting rid of that entire Reagan-era waiver, then you certainly shouldn't want to pass this resolution, which would weaken it.
I find it interesting that it passed the Senate. You had Manchin, Tester, Brown. I mean, they supported this. They supported this resolution, so.
Another way to
you've got
say
people-
that is that-
And actually, the Senate is controlled by the Democrats, so.
Well, another way
How
to
did
say
this
it is
get through?
90% of Democrats didn't support it.
No. It passed, and it's going to pass here, too.
Gentlelady from Indiana is recognized for any questions she might have for the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions. I just want to thank Representative Nels for bringing the bill forward, and I agree with you. The waiver does nothing but make a bad decision worse. This administration is wasting taxpayer dollars on EV chargers that most Americans don't want and won't use. It's now pushing to line the pockets of the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, instead of directing those taxpayer dollars toward U.S. manufacturers. It's not only wasteful, it's a handout to the CCP and Xi Jinping. So thank you for bringing this important legislation. I'm glad to support it, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. I want to thank both of our witnesses for appearing today, and you are excused.
Troy, you deserve a cigar after that.